UK Armed Forces Chief Defence warning signals a shift toward whole-nation readiness. Britain's top military officer has delivered an unusually blunt UK Armed Forces Chief Defence warning. The country should stop treating major war as a remote thought experiment and start acting like risk is rising. In a major London lecture on December 15, Chief of the Defence Staff Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton argued that deterrence is still working, but the threats around the UK and NATO are growing in scale, speed, and sophistication. His core message was not simply spend more. It was broader, and in some ways harder. Society itself needs to prepare, from industry and infrastructure to skills, reserves, and civic resilience. This piece explains what changed in Knighton's warning, what it suggests about UK strategy, and why the argument is landing now. It also looks at what a whole-of-nation posture actually means in practice, and what to watch next as the UK tries to convert speeches into capability. The story turns on whether Britain can rebuild credible deterrence without breaking the social contract that makes deterrence possible. Key points. The UK's Armed Forces Chief warned that the security environment is worsening, and that national defence cannot be left to the military alone. Knighton pushed a whole-of-nation approach, stronger defence industry, more resilient infrastructure, and a broader public understanding of risk. Russia was presented as the central near-term driver of risk, particularly in the grey zone below open war, alongside the possibility of wider NATO escalation. The speech tied warnings to policy momentum already underway, including plans to raise defence spending and accelerate technology adoption. The UK is moving toward a model that blends deterrence with domestic resilience, undersea protection, drones, counter-drones, and faster procurement. The political challenge is sustaining public consent for sacrifice, trade, offs, and long-run investment without triggering backlash or fatigue. The next test is delivery, recruitment, industrial output, stockpiles, and infrastructure protection, not rhetoric. Background. The Chief of the Defence Staff, CDs, is the UK's most senior uniformed officer and the government's principal military advisor. When a CDS uses a national platform to talk about sacrifice and societal readiness, it is not routine signalling. It is an attempt to shape how the country thinks. Knighton's warning lands in a European security context defined by Russia's war in Ukraine, heightened concern about sabotage and disruption across Europe, and persistent anxiety about whether Western defence industrial capacity can scale quickly enough. In parallel, NATO allies have been pressing for higher spending and more credible readiness, with greater emphasis on resilience at home, not just forces abroad. In the UK, this debate is also shaped by a long post-Cold War drift away from mass mobilization thinking. Large parts of the public have little direct contact with the armed forces, and politics has often treated defense as a budget line rather than a societal project. Knighton's argument is that this gap is now a strategic weakness. Analysis. Political and geopolitical dimensions. Knighton's warning is less about predicting a specific invasion date and more about changing the national baseline, what Britain considers normal risk. The strategic bet is that clearer public realism strengthens deterrence. If adversaries believe a country is psychologically unprepared, they may assume it will hesitate, fracture, or bargain under pressure. The geopolitical logic is also about alliance credibility. NATO deterrence depends on collective resolve. But resolve is not just a military posture. It is political endurance under cyber disruption, energy shocks, disinformation, and economic coercion. Knighton is effectively arguing that deterrence is being tested continuously, not only on a battlefield. There is also a domestic political edge to this. A whole-of-nation posture implies trade-offs, spending priorities, public sector focus, industrial policy, and potentially uncomfortable conversations about manpower and reserves. Even without formal conscription, governments may need stronger incentives and expectations around service, skills, and participation. Economic and market impact. When defense leaders talk about readiness, markets hear long-duration demand. A serious push for resilience means more procurement, more supply chain work, and more domestic capacity. But it also means friction, bottlenecks in manufacturing, competition for engineers, and pressure on public finances. A key point in Knighton's framing is that defense industrial capacity is not simply a Ministry of Defense issue. It touches universities, apprenticeships, research funding, and private sector investment decisions. If government wants faster scale, It must create stable demand signals and reduce procurement volatility that discourages companies from expanding. The risk is that rearmament becomes a slogan without throughput. Stockpiles, spare parts, repair capacity, and training pipelines are less glamorous than new platforms, but they are what make readiness real. This is where the economic argument either succeeds quietly or fails loudly. Technological and security implications. Knighton's warning sits on a practical observation. Modern conflict is moving toward mass, speed, and autonomy. Drones and counter-drones are no longer niche. Undersea infrastructure is no longer a background concern. Artificial intelligence is not just a buzzword, it is becoming an advantage in sensing, targeting, logistics, and decision support. This matters because it shifts what preparedness looks like. It is not only ships, jets, and armored vehicles. It is also rapid innovation loops, data integration, secure networks, and the ability to field new systems quickly at scale. It is the difference between a force that modernizes in peacetime timelines and one that adapts in wartime timelines. The security implication for households is uncomfortable but straightforward. Disruption is a feature, not an exception. Resilience planning increasingly overlaps with critical infrastructure, communications, transport, and health systems. If the front line is everywhere, then deterrence also becomes partly about how fast society can recover. Social and cultural fallout. This is the hardest part. Knighton is implicitly asking a consumer society to think like a contingency society. Talk of sacrifice collides with decades of political messaging that promised security as a background condition. Many people now experience economic strain, public service pressure, and distrust in institutions. Asking for more money, more commitment, or more personal participation risks being read as ordinary people pay, elites decide. If the government leans into a national readiness posture, it will need a narrative that feels fair. That means transparency about threats, but also visible competence, faster procurement, cleaner accountability, credible recruitment reform, and honest discussion of what resilience requires. What most coverage misses. The overlooked issue is not whether the UK can spend more, it is whether the UK can absorb more. A whole-nation defence posture demands coordination across institutions that do not naturally work as one system. Local government, regulators, telecoms, transport operators, universities, health services, and private firms. In a crisis, seams are targets. Deterrence depends on closing those seams before someone exploits them. The second-order effect is political legitimacy. Resilience is partly psychological. If the public believes plans are performative, or that burden sharing is unequal, readiness efforts can backfire. In that sense, the defense warning is also a governance warning. Capability and trust rise or fall together. Why this matters? In the short term, this shift affects defense procurement, recruitment, and infrastructure protection. It will shape what gets funded, what gets built, and which skills become national priorities. In the long term, it changes how the UK organises government itself. A real whole-of-nation model links security to industrial strategy, education, research, and emergency planning. It can strengthen deterrence, but it also sets expectations for years of sustained investment and public tolerance for trade-offs. Watch for concrete milestones rather than rhetorical escalation. The key signals are budget implementation, delivery timelines for new technology programs, measurable, growth in reserves and training capacity, and specific resilience planning for critical infrastructure. Real-world impact. A logistics manager in northeast England sees new security requirements hit port operations. More checks, tighter cyber rules, and contingency drills slow throughput at first, but reduce the risk of catastrophic disruption later. A small advanced manufacturing firm in the Midlands gets pulled into defense supply chains. Demand rises, but so do compliance costs, staffing pressures, and the need to invest ahead of guaranteed contracts. A hospital lead in London is asked to align resilience plans with national security expectations. That means more testing, more redundancy, and harder budget choices in already stretched systems. A rail network planner in Scotland is tasked with continuity under stress scenarios. The work is unglamorous: backup communications, staffing contingencies, and coordination with local authorities. But it is exactly what determines whether disruption becomes panic. Road ahead. Knighton's UK Armed Forces Chief Defence Warning is a bid to reset national assumptions. The UK cannot treat security as something delivered solely by professionals while the rest of society watches from the sidelines. The fork in the road is clear. Britain can pursue a narrow approach focused on platforms and spending targets, or it can build a wider resilience model that treats industry, skills, infrastructure, and public consent as core parts of deterrence. The first is easier to announce. The second is harder to deliver, but more likely to hold under pressure. The early signs will be practical, faster procurement pathways, visible industrial ramp-up, credible recruitment, improvements, and real resilience exercises that involve more than the defense establishment. If those move, the warning becomes strategy. If they stall, it becomes another speech in an increasingly dangerous era.